In the last 30 years, the world of science and the HIV and AIDS community have worked together to control the HIV epidemic. How? With incredible resilience, a united spirit, and an unwavering focus. These qualities have always defined the HIV and AIDS community. Despite the challenges faced, whatever tried to stand in the way, the community didn't give in, and we kept going. And right now, despite a new wave of challenges, still, we have to keep going. Until fear becomes hope. Until there are no new HIV infections. Until ignorance becomes acceptance. So people living with HIV are understood and accepted. Until born with becomes born without. When no more children are born with HIV. We won't stop until ambition becomes success. And research offers more ways to treat and hopefully one day cure HIV. We won't stop. ViiV Healthcare, here until HIV and AIDS are not.
Good afternoon and welcome to all attending the ViiV Healthcare Symposium titled Pediatric Dolutegravir at the Core for Children Living with HIV. This symposium aims to provide the opportunity for us as clinicians to reflect on the advances, the challenges, and the opportunities in pediatric HIV care. ViiV Healthcare is excited to bring you the symposium to all attendees, and we hope that it adds value to you. As a declaration, I'm Dr. Ismail Ibrahim. I completed my postgraduate training as a clinical pharmacologist at the University of Cape Town. I'm currently employed by ViiV Healthcare as a regional medical scientist for Africa. Allow me to please speak a little bit about who we are as an organization. ViiV Healthcare is the only pharmaceutical company solely focused on combating, preventing, and ultimately curing HIV and AIDS. We exist to ensure no one living with HIV and AIDS is left behind. To achieve this, we are 100% dedicated to address the challenges of the HIV epidemic through prioritizing research aimed at delivering innovative HIV medicines and solutions that make a difference to our patients in both the pediatric and adult populations. It is indeed our vision to end the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and thus we prioritize collaborative partnerships with generic organizations to speed up access to the much-needed antiretroviral formulations in Africa. As we look at the exciting agenda this afternoon, I look forward to an engaging, informative, and insightful symposium. We are honored to have an expert speaker panel to highlight dolutegravir at the core for children living with HIV, helping us leave no child behind. I would like to introduce our expert panel speakers. Our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Sirafusa Sakiri from Uganda. He is the Global Medical Lead for Pediatrics at ViiV Healthcare. Prior to joining ViiV, Dr. Sakiri worked as a management consultant supporting both government and private sectors in Africa and Asia on their access to medicines and thus creating effective partnerships in doing so. Dr. Sakiri will speak on our pediatric dolutegravir clinical data and review the updates on the management guidelines. He will also briefly talk to the game-changing pediatric dolutegravir formulations to come. Thereafter, we have Dr. Mogomotsi Machaba from Botswana, a graduate from the University College of Dublin. He is currently a clinical professor of pediatric retrovirology at the Baylor College of Medicine and also serves as the executive director of the Botswana Baylor Clinic. He has an extensive experience in both clinical practice and clinical research as a principal investigator on several studies, including the NIH-funded Collaborative African Genomics Network project. Dr. Mashaba is also the chairman of Botswana's National HIV Syphilis Elimination Validation Committee, and he also sits in several Ministry of Health and Wellness committees as the pediatric HIV expert informing both TB and HIV treatment guidelines. Dr. Mashaba will be speaking on the need for pediatric dolutegravir in children living with HIV. At this point, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Sirafusa Sakiri, for an exciting start to our symposium.
Hi, everyone. I'm Serufusa Sekide, and I'm the Global Medical Lead for Pediatrics from ViiV Healthcare, and I'm really excited to be talking to you today about pediatric dolutegravir clinical data. Full disclosure, I'm a full-time employee of ViiV Healthcare. Now, ViiV Healthcare has a mission to ensure that no person living with HIV and AIDS is left behind. And we have pediatrics being very key to delivering our mission. We have a diverse set portfolio of medicines, which I'll be sharing a little bit more about on as we go along today. And we also want to acknowledge that we work with a number of partners who really work with us to accelerate the development and access to the medicines that children need. And that allows us to live true to our mission of leaving no person with HIV and AIDS behind. In terms of our portfolio of medicines that we have products that have been the bedrock of HIV treatment from the very beginning. And as you can see there, all the way from AZT, coming all the way now to products like dolutegravir, which we're going to talk a little bit more about on the conversation today. Now, dolutegravir was approved last year in the US by the FDA, and early this year was approved by EMA for use in the European region, and it's getting approval in a number of countries as we go along. Just to be clear, you should only use medications that have been licensed in your particular setting, and you should only use them for the dosage, for the options and formulations that have been approved in your particular setting. As I mentioned, one of the key products is dolutegravir, and with that, there have been questions from clinicians and others about when they should use it, whatever setting it should be used in, and also really conversations around what the advantages are and what the guidelines say. And my hope is that I will take you through those today in the conversation that we will have. Now, the reason for a number of these questions is really because there have been limited treatment options for children living with HIV in the past. Those ones that have been there have actually had a number of issues or concerns, ranging from issues around the low barrier to resistance, which we've seen in nevirapine and raltegravir. There have been questions around safety issues for some of the options for children, which, as you can see, they're ranging all the way from cardiac ones to systemic ones to liver toxicity issues, as well as issues around dosing intervals, which can sometimes be complex and varied for children, depending on the option for treatment that you have for them. And of course, there have been questions around administration and palatability of some of the options that are there, with some of them not having the exact taste. And as you know, for those of you with children or who have managed children before, I think taste is a really important issue for children, as well as other issues. And I hope that in our conversation today, we can go through some of those issues and we juxtapose them against what we have for dolutegravir. Now, dolutegravir, according to when you place it against the criteria that has been defined by the Drugs for Neglected Diseases Initiative, DNDi, is actually fitting quite a lot in what is in the ideal section of that, in terms of, as we said earlier, in terms of dosing, for example, where it's a once a daily option in most cases. The formulation is actually now a disposable tablet that is being rolled out, which is once again very ideal for the settings that we're in. We will talk a little bit more around the efficacy of dolutegravir, and we'll share that around the clinical studies that have been done for children. But I think it's very clear that it's the same superiority that we are also seeing in the adult setting, which is once again very comforting. And as I've said as well, there are particular advantages in terms of taste, in terms of safety, and we'll talk a little bit more around how there are actually no drug interactions when looking at some of the interactions that could be there with a number of medicines that are used to treat children with HIV. So really exciting to see that it maps out really well against this criteria. And I think the key point, once again, to summarize that is that it is a core agent for today when you look at it in terms of efficacy, barrier to resistance, tolerability, dosing, as well as the option of it being booster free because of its high potency. So really a lot of ticks when you look at what is there for dolutegravir. And on this slide here, you'll see that actually this summarizes the points that I've made earlier around how it fits along that spectrum of what is acceptable to what is actually ideal in children. I think the key point to note once again is going back to my point earlier about using drugs, using dolutegravir for their licensed use in your particular setting. I think the one thing to point out now is that dolutegravir is not yet licensed for use in neonates and newborns, and therefore want to flag that there are ongoing clinical trials that are going to assess that, but at the moment it's not licensed for use in that particular population. I think the other point to note out here is that apart from the other advantages that we've just shared out, the one particular one to note here is on dyslipidemia and on fat maldistribution, where we will talk a bit around a number of a clinical trial, the Odyssey trial, which came out with some results that showed really a favorable profile when looking at dyslipidemia issues, when looking at maldistribution issues of fat in children, which is actually also very comforting to have data that speaks to that. A key question, as always, is really what populations are ideal to use dolutegravir. And here we'll talk a little bit more around what's being used for treatment-naive children and also those who are after fast failure. And with that, we can actually use the example or the data that we are seeing from the two key studies for dolutegravir. The first one was the Peter 93 study, which was a dose finding study. And the other one is the Odyssey study, which was an safety and efficacy study. Both these studies were carried out in partnership with our collaborators, Impact for Peter 93 and with Penta for the Odyssey study. And so I'd like to acknowledge the work that they have put into this and really carried the study to the very end. And now we're seeing some of these results come out for both of these studies in not only at conferences, which we saw at CROI this year, at International AIDS Society conference this year, as well as manuscripts that are coming up for both Peter 93 and for the Odyssey study to really make sure the results are disseminated widely. For the Odyssey study in particular, and as I said, came out at a number of conferences this year, I think the key take home that we can see from the data that was presented was that dolutegravir is superior across all age groups, across all weight bands, from 3 kilograms and above, 4 weeks of age and above, all the way up to 18 years of age. So really ideal for young children and adolescents. And that data was very reassuring. And as I said, more of that will be shared in journals and others that are coming out. Looking at Odyssey in particular, you'll see here that this study really looked at children who were treatment naive in Odyssey A, and in Odyssey B, so that children who were moving from first line to second line therapy. And you'll see that they were randomized 1-to-1. And as I said, the results really showed really great results in terms of efficacy, where you'll see here on this slide, when you look at 0, which is at 0 there, you'll see that the confidence interval for dolutegravir was to the left of 0, meaning that it was superior to the standard of care, which is very reassuring and comforting to clinicians and others who are using the medication. In terms of adverse events, for 14 kilograms and above, there were more ART modifying events in the standard of care than in dolutegravir. So once again, very reassuring. And also looking at 14 kilograms and below, you will see that there are also similarly more ART defining events in the standard of care, which means that from a safety perspective, dolutegravir ends up being quite ideal for children in those settings. When you starting to shift a bit, looking at the efficacy and all, you see that at 48 and 96 weeks, the gains in CD4 cell count were similar, and similar results were seen for this CD4 percentage levels across the various weight bands and age groups, which is once again very reassuring. Earlier on, I alluded to the to issues around cholesterol that were assessed during this clinical trial. And we found that actually there were lower levels in dolutegravir arm than in the standard of care arm. Really reassuring, really comforting, and really allows us to shape this narrative and conversation that we've all been having around some of these metabolic effects that are seen in ARTs. Now, switching gears a bit to look about the use of dolutegravir in situations where you're trying to switch in suppressed patients and where you're trying to reduce cumulative toxicities. And here, looking again at this study here, that the SMILE study, where it looked at once daily integrase inhibitor with boosted darunavir, compared it against the standard of care, large study with 300 patients, 6 to 18 years of age. And you'll see that from the results of the study, I think we were able to demonstrate the results that show that switching to integrase inhibitor with boosted darunavir was non-inferior virologically. There was similar safety in both arms, and really these results support the current recommendation of dolutegravir with darunavir that is boosted for third line in children who are living with HIV. Now, looking at the guidelines in more detail, looking at especially the three major guidelines, you'll see that what is painted here is a picture that actually there's a remarkable consistency in recommending dolutegravir as the co-agent of choice when treating children with HIV, as especially when looking at the first line regimens in these populations. And similarly, when the World Health Organization and others are thinking about transition of care, I think it's the dolutegravir is seen as favorable and ideal, especially because it allows to have consistency in drug, not only in children, but also as they transition into adults. I think they're able to continue with the same therapy, which is very ideal from an adherence perspective, and also from a programmatic perspective is helpful for programs on the ground. So in summary, dolutegravir has been shown to be ideal for children from 4 weeks of age, 3 kilograms of weight and above, all the way up to adolescence and continuing into adulthood. We've shown that it's clinically superior versus the other core agents that are there, with a high barrier to resistance, safety profile that is and tolerability that is ideal, a metabolic profile that is quite favorable, it's palatable, and also I think a really important perspective is also on the dosing, which is once daily and has easy administration and tolerability. So this works really well for children living with HIV. As always, in your clinical setting, please report any adverse events to the authorities or to the contacts within GSK and ViiV Healthcare that are there on the slide. And I will now hand over to the next section with Dr. Machaba. Thank you.
Good day, colleagues. My name is Dr. Mohamed C. Matsaba. I wear a few hats and I'll only share two today. I'm the Executive Director for the Botswana Baylor Children's Clinical Center of Excellence, as well as Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at Baylor College of Medicine, Houston, Texas. Today, I'll be talking to you about our experience in using dolutegravir in Botswana, the pediatric dosing. I will not go much into the science because my colleagues before me have gone through the science behind the drug. Here are my two disclaimers. I developed the slides. They were not developed by GSK. I'm an external expert, and what I share here are my views and comments. I am not an employee of GSK or ViiV, and I have received an honorarium from ViiV for participating in this webinar. So my presentation is set up this way. I will start with a background. I think it's important for you to understand why we make decisions we make, our setup, and then what we are finding out, as well as the decision to optimize treatment using dolutegravir. So as a form of background, pediatric medicines usually lag behind adult medicines, and this is by design, because in designing treatment, we first try it with adults and then go on to children. This applies across clinical care as well. So what usually happens for pediatrics is the infrastructure lags behind, human capacity lags behind, and then usually the treatment, because the numbers are usually much less than those of adults, becomes prohibitive as well. Because children generally don't vote, most systems, including our country, Botswana, they don't have a voice at the table. And because of that, then the commitment lags behind. So to try and counter this, many years ago, Botswana decided we will be proactive in getting the best treatment for our pediatric patients as soon as it becomes available for adults. And this is what has applied to the dolutegravir treatment that we are discussing today. Our model, which is the setting, we decided that to counter all of these problems, we will build clinical infrastructure, we will build critical human capacity to take care of these children, and then create a model of care and treatment that can be replicated in other resource-limited settings. We also don't center on one central point. We also do outreach and go to communities hardest hit by HIV and many other diseases that affect children, and then generate knowledge that we share, and that's what we are doing today. This is our center based in the capital city of Botswana, which is Gaborone. It's in the campus of the National Referral Hospital called Princess Marina. This becomes important as we discuss the transition and our role in the Botswana national guidelines for HIV care and treatment. So to date, Botswana being a unique center, we are the tertiary, sometimes we call ourselves quaternary level referral center for care for children in Botswana. We care for almost 6,000 children across the country, with about 2,500 being at the center. Our patient population are all on heart, so 99.9% are actually on heart. We have one client who has, we are still working on getting back on heart. Adolescents make up most of our patients. And then we have outreach sites across the country, 16 sites across the country. So our reach is also throughout the country. Loss to follow-up, again, a regional problem. We're at 1.3% at 6 months. And then survival at 12 months, if you start as a baby in our clinic, is 99%. We are very aggressive in making sure that we retain this number at this high level. In terms of adherence, when you deal with adolescents, you start dealing with adherence issues. And our current levels are at 86%, while the efficacy based on viral suppression, we again are at probably one of the highest levels in this population at 94%. So the second part is to tell you a little bit about evolution of ART treatment in Botswana. So again, we were one of the first adopters of the early treatments, starting essentially in the mid-90s with mother-to-child transmission, prevention of mother-to-child transmission. Then around 2001, we introduced the national pilot program in 4 places, where we were using the old drugs that you see on this slide. And we've had many, many iterations of this guidelines, including the last one from 20 2019-2020, which doesn't really appear here. So again, you will note that we have gone through multiple NNRTIs, multiple NRTIs, multiple PIs as well, making this a place where evolution of mutations is a significant concern, and that becomes important as we discuss the DTG that we are talking about. And then as we develop this, we also look into the future. We look at a possibility of using dual treatments and all these other issues so that we remain at the cutting edge of medical developments in the HIV treatment of children. So this is a transition plan designed around 2016 that looked at how we would transition from the old drugs all the way to the newer, much safer treatments. Again, I'll not go into the science and the reasoning behind that, because what we know is the newer generation drugs are much, much safer as compared to the old drugs that were the only option around 2000 to 2005. So we were doing this transition over a phased period starting from around 2018 when adults, we were introducing a DTG, followed by replacing the most toxic with this newer and safer drugs. Then you don't see children here, but they are in the an undercurrent behind all these changes that were proposed. We have gone through these phases, and essentially we have moved the majority of our adult population onto a DTG-based regimen. Then in 2019, 2020, we revised our guidelines again. You will note that the transition is very clear as a country as we move on to newer and better drugs. So again, the Pediatric Summit, which we keep on discussing what is coming in terms of children, continues. And actually today, we have another meeting where we are discussing the next steps. I'll touch a little bit on that in the next few slides. For pediatrics as well, we also started a transition. We have been waiting for the arrival of this new formulation, the 10 milligram dispersible. And based on that, some of the recommendations that we have in the 2019 guidelines or suggestions have now been modified based on the availability and the rollout of this new formulation. The reasons why we do this are multiple, and I think our colleagues would have touched on some of them. We believe that in a place such as Botswana, where you had free access to multiple different classes of drugs, you are going to be dealing a lot with resistance. So the high barrier to resistance actually is the main reason why we opted to go for the DTG. But beyond that, it also solves a lot of problems, especially in the 0 to 5 age group, where you have children finding it difficult to take the current medications because of the volumes, because of the taste, because of the number and size of tablets. So we believe it's more child-friendly, caregiver-friendly, easier to administer, and then there is flexibility in dosing, specifically with the once daily dosing that is quite a driver in some of our decisions. And then it optimizes also our supply chain issues. As you know, Botswana is a small population, 2.3 million, and getting doses for pediatrics in this country, where our PMTCT rate is very low, below 2%, it becomes a problem. So the simpler your procurement issues are, the better. Then there is a clear cost effectiveness that as compared to the old drugs that we are using, about a factor of 70 to 75% saving. So all of this are the reasons why, as a country, we long decided that as soon as this becomes available, we will support it. So the new recommendations, as are being discussed, is to move all children as soon as practical to a DTG-based regimen. We have already started doing that for adults and adolescents, women and adolescent girls, and now we are looking at younger and younger children. And where we are still discussing, and perhaps we may go off label, and again, these are still discussions, they are not decisions, is in the 0 to 4 weeks of age, where we feel probably there is a role for this drug as well. So this again are not concluded, but there are current discussions that we are having. If you focus at the bottom of the screen, we are looking at prophylaxis, where that now includes DTG, and then as soon as possible, once you confirm infection, you move them to a DTG-based regimen. Again, this slide talks to our current discussions. We are still discussing, if you look at the neonate section, we are still discussing as to how to safely do this in the 0 to 4, based on the fact that there's not a lot of information in this area. And I think as a manufacturer, it's an area to look at, because we are really interested in introducing a DTG as early as possible. Again, I'll not spend much time on this because they are have been shared in terms of dosing. We are following the same dosing recommendations as per WHO. Now, if currently what has been our experience in the 0 to 5 age group, you will note that only 3.8% are now on DTG. We still have loads of stocks of the old treatment regimen, and we need to clear those stocks. And as soon as we do that, they will continue to transition. The two that you see transitioned here had multiple significant issues with the old regimen and were switched before others. But I think in the next couple of months, most of this will be switched as our stocks run dry of the lopinavir ritonavir combination. In the 5 to 9 age groups, we are looking at around 63.8% now already switched. And again, it's issues of getting rid of the old stock that we have. For the adolescents, we are 100% where all of our adolescents are now on DTG. And our experience has been quite positive. This is a presentation we did at the international conference in Gaborone, showing that suppression rates are quite impressive. And here we were mainly looking at children and adolescents who were very difficult to manage at the time. So again, we continue to generate new data, and we will be sharing that at this year's conferences. So in my last few seconds, I'll be concluding. What we have noted in Botswana is treatment optimization is possible using this drug. It's very well accepted by patients and their caregivers. It improves adherence, specifically for adolescents who have been such an issue. And then under 5s and specifically the 0 to 4 weeks old, I think there's more work that needs to be done so that they can also benefit from this drug. Thank you.